Well, following AfriForum's campaign to mobilize their members and the public to submit complaints to the South African Human Rights Commission in October, the Commission has found that there is sufficient reason to have some of Julius Malema and the EFF's statements be declared as hate speech and incitement to violence. The Commission gave the EFF and Malema 10 days to retract these statements and to apologize. Julius Malema told Newzroom Afrika in an interview on Thursday that he would in fact not apologize for his statements because the Commission had taken the speech out of context. Well, joining me now to have this conversation is AfriForum spokesperson Ernst, who's also the strategy and campaigns officer for the group. Ernst, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us. I do want to start with your organization's position on this issue. We have the Human Rights Commission that has said that Malema's utterances are as clear as day. The intention is clear. They were to foment some sort of violence. What's your organization's interpretation of the EFF leader's comments?
Right, so AfriForum agrees with the South African Human Rights Commission when it comes to the comments of Julius Malema. What he said on that day is clearly that he was inciting violence and also committing hate speech. And hate speech, of course, also contains that incitement to violence element. And I mean, you just have to look at, I mean, you can just go look at what he said, and then the South African Human Rights Commission sums it up in their summary of what was said. Just one example, I think, will demonstrate it perfectly. So, in one instance, Julius Malema questioned why the white person in Brackenfell, that incident a few years ago, that was there, part of a brawl there, had not been located and, in his own words, taken to an isolated place and attended to properly. And then just after that, he says, you must never be scared to kill. So, I mean, that's clear as day, a call to violence and a call to kill. So AfriForum supports the South African Human Rights Commission in this case. And the ball's now in their court. When it comes to the defense or the excuses of saying it's just a metaphor, that's always been it's just a metaphor has always been the hiding place of cowards and thugs all across history. It's not good enough, and we'll see now that the ball is in the South African Human Rights Commission's court, what they do next. It's their move now.
Well, you say the ball is now in the Human Rights Commission's court. Julius Malema, who has refused to retract his statement and has refused to apologize, he maintains that the Commission is not in the best position to actually handle this issue. He's questioned whether or not the Commission is able to conduct a fair process, given the fact that, you know, some sort of right of reply wasn't given to the other side. They weren't afforded an opportunity to explain themselves and to perhaps even explain the context to which he's alluding to. What are your thoughts on that response and the potential that it has to, I suppose, cast a dark cloud on whatever prevails as we move forward?
Well, we don't live in a country where political opposition do not have access to the internet or aren't able to put their side of the story out there. So he is absolutely able to tell the EFF side of the story with today's technology and everything, the free speech that is awarded to him by the Constitution. And then also, this is the same South African Human Rights Commission that has exonerated Julius Malema in the past, that has said that many of the things that he said in the past are not hate speech. So I don't think he can say that this will not be a fair trial if it were to go to court, and it should. This is the South African Human Rights Commission has sided with Julius Malema in the past, showing that I think that they'll handle this fairly. I think that's a good indication. But at the same time, like I said earlier, this has to go to court now. The South African Human Rights Commission has said that if Julius Malema and the EFF do not apologize and retract, it will go to the Equality Court. AfriForum will make sure they go through with their promise. Otherwise, if the South African Human Rights Commission does not take the EFF to court, AfriForum itself will have to take the Julius Malema and the EFF to court, and then we will also know that the South African Human Rights Commission can only make threats and not really take action if it were to unfortunately turn out in that way. But we will be watching closely, and I do think the South African Human Rights Commission will go through with taking the EFF and Julius Malema to court on this matter, seeing as that is their responsibility, and it falls completely within what they should do as an organization. If they don't, then I don't really see the use of the organization, seeing as this is a clear case of where the South African Human Rights Commission has a mandate to intervene.
Well, Ernst, I would very much like to play a quick excerpt from Julius Malema's conversation right here on Newzroom Afrika. Let's just take a quick listen.
What type of democracy is that, where the other side is not being heard? Is it because I'm an African? Is it because I'm a child of a domestic worker that my view doesn't matter, that my side of the story doesn't matter, that the white man complained, and because the white man complained, his views are supreme than mine? I'm not going to allow that, not from a Human Rights Commission, not from anyone, not even from the courts. The court hears hardened criminals. They hear their side of the story. I'm making a political articulation. And Human Rights Commission, all they can do, what do you mean by this? At least even if they've taken a decision, let them be seen to be, listening to the other side. That's all I'm saying.
Well, we've already dealt with the issue of whether or not this is a fair process, but the question that I would like to put to you is on the issue that Julius Malema raises in that clip, that he was merely making a political articulation. This is something that also sort of reared its head when AfriForum and the EFF were lost in court over a similar issue, over hate speech, over the Kill the Boer song, the fact that there is an entire political context behind the usage of some of this language and some of this rhetoric. If you do decide to go forward with this matter and take it to court, are you confident of a victory, given the track record that your organization already has in dealing with these sort of linguistic, political, rhetoric articulation issues?
Yes, I think here in this case we have a very strong case, and we definitely, firstly we're going to have to see what happens in this court case where the South African Human Rights Commission will hopefully be taking Julius Malema and the EFF to court. And I think they have a very strong case. I think with specifically this instance, there's not a lot of nuance. There's no way to really explain away what was being said at this speech. What was being said at this speech was an incitement to violence and hate speech. If this is not declared hate speech and incitement to violence, if a court does not find this, what Malema said here in this speech, as incitement to violence and hate speech, we might as well retire the terms hate speech and the concept of incitement to violence, because then nothing can be incitement to violence or hate speech. Or the other implication is that some politicians are just above the law and they can say what they want and threaten who they want. That's a very chaotic state of affairs that would be very dangerous for South Africa. We all hope that's not the outcome, but if that is the outcome, if he is not found guilty in the court case that is coming of hate speech and incitement to violence, with this what he said here, then that will send a clear message, unfortunately, that many politicians are above the law, and that's what we are trying to stop. That's what AfriForum and hopefully the South African Human Rights Commission will achieve here, is to show to the country and to set a precedent that politicians are not above the law. You're not allowed to threaten to kill people. You're not allowed to call for violence. You're not allowed to incite violence. And you're not allowed to threaten minorities with violence or killing. And hopefully with this case, that precedent can be set, because there's no place for it in our constitutional democracy.
Well, the EFF identifies as a radical political outfit, a radical political organization. It has a revolutionary agenda. These are some of the sort of rhetoric that we've seen come to the fore in defense of its actions and the language that its leader often uses. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the EFF is pushing its political rhetoric too far, and that South Africans haven't yet sort of found the means to respond adequately to what it's doing and how it's shaping the political landscape?
Well, there was a quote from that very same speech that Julius Malema said that's very revealing, and the South African Human Rights Commission points to it as well, where he says that anything that stands in the way of the revolution needs to be eliminated. So he's currently in charge of a more or less 10% party in South Africa, so 90% of the electorate's currently standing in the way of his revolution. That means in his ideology, he will not stop to even eliminate citizens that don't support his view and his revolution. But I mean, that's not surprising, seeing if you look at the ideology that he follows and the political heroes that he holds in high esteem. These are specifically his Marxist-Leninist roots of his party. This is an ideology that's killed millions of people, and not millions of soldiers, millions of civilians, irregular people that weren't willing to go along with the revolution. So his speech makes complete sense within his radical extremist framework, but it should not be allowed because it leads that type of speech and that type of rhetoric in the past within the historical context has led to the deaths and slaughtering and torturing of millions of people, and that's definitely the historical context that will have to be taken into account. If any context is important, it's definitely that context when it comes to the court case that is on the way.
Yes. Well, he also quotes decolonialist and theorist Frantz Fanon, especially on the issue of racism and how a victim of racism ought to respond. He argues that it should be responded with utilizing violence, that violence should be met with another form of violence. What do you make of that? And if you disagree, how do you think South Africans who are on the receiving end of racism and racist attacks, how do you think they should actually respond in those instances, whether it be a microaggression or an overt form of racism?
Right. Let's start with the first question. When it comes to his idea that violence should be met with violence, then you look at the EFF's press statement this week, and then you see how they define violence. Their definition of violence is incredibly wide. So in their press statement, they make the claim that even an unequal distribution of wealth between two races constitutes violence, and then according to their logic, then violence as a reaction to that is justified. So their definition of violence is completely irrational and absurd, but it justifies violence in almost any context. You just say, well, inequality exists, therefore I am allowed to be violent. That's not right. Secondly, to answer your second question, how should South Africans react that are the victims of racism? Well, firstly, you shouldn't accept it. If you are discriminated against based on your race, if you are racially abused based on your race, that's something you shouldn't accept, and that's something that should be socially condemned. The people around you, society at large, should condemn it. There should be a pushback against it, and it should be something that should be morally condemned, something that there should be a strong message sent out in society that it's wrong. A good example of that was with Dis-Chem, with their racially discriminatory hiring practices, where they refused to hire white South Africans and refused to promote them. There was a massive outcry in public, and the moral message was sent that this is wrong and this is not right. That's the type of reaction that's needed to confront cases of racism. For example, racially discriminatory hiring practices. If there's any company in South Africa that refuses to hire anyone based on their race, there should be a massive outcry in public, and that's the way you respond to it. There should be a moral precedent, a moral standard should be set. Just as you respond to any other thing that is wrong or immoral, is that people need to stand together and say, we will not allow this, and we will not allow this to happen again in the future, and we are putting our foot down and drawing a line. That's the way that you respond to it. You respond to it as a community, you respond to it as a society, and you morally condemn it. You make sure everyone understands that it is wrong and should not be replicated in the future.
Right. Well, Ernst, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us on our platform this morning. Of course, that's a story that we will continue to watch, certainly as the South African Human Rights Commission moves forward with that. Up next...